How's it going, Rogues Gallery, and welcome to another Flesh and Blood video. Today we are talking about the top 10 must-have common and rare generic cards for every single Flesh and Blood player. That was kind of a mouthful there, but we're talking about the top 10 common and rare generic cards for every single Flesh and Blood player. I think this list is going to be very informational. It's a really fun list, honestly. There's a lot of really sweet common and rare generic cards. They go in a lot of competitive decks, a lot of, even casual decks. There's so many good common and rare cards. It's actually very hard for me to narrow this down to just 10 cards. My initial list was like 25 or 26 cards. So there's a lot of really good stuff here. And, they're just common cards. So if you're a budget player or you're a beginning Flesh and Blood player, there's a lot of stuff here to delve into, because these are going to be cards that you're going to use in a lot of decks. Some of these cards you put in almost every deck you build. Before we get started with the list, I do want to give a couple quick shoutouts. If you're looking to pick up Flesh and Blood singles and you live in the United States, definitely check out FAB Foundry. Excellent pricing, excellent customer service, just the whole package. They support the community. They have a lot of cool events. I really like FAB Foundry. I do have an affiliate link with them in the description down below. If you're from Canada, definitely check out Red Riot Games. Same kind of spiel there, but they're from Canada, so you don't have to pay for that crazy international shipping. If you are looking to pick up sealed product, I do have an affiliate link with TCG Player, also in the description down below, so check all of that stuff out. If you'd like to support me directly, check out my Patreon. I have a couple tiers there where I give cards back to you, and some tiers there where I actually give booster packs back to you. Currently, patrons are getting first edition Crucible of War. But without further ado, let's get on with this top 10 list. I do want to mention, in a week or two, we will be doing the same exact list, but we'll be doing it for super rares and majestics. So today we're talking about commons and rares, and then a week or two we're going to be doing the super rares and majestics. So without further ado, let's get started with the top 10 must-have common and rares generic cards for Flesh and Blood. Let's do it.
So the first card I want to talk about is Ravenous Rabble, and I should also mention now that this list is in no particular order except for maybe the last card on the list. Ravenous Rabble is a very aggressive card. It's a really good card too, and you're going to put this in a lot of aggressive decks, especially decks that you want to go wide on. What that means basically is decks that you want to play a lot of different actions in a turn, specifically attack actions in a turn. So Ravenous Rabble is a 0-cost card with a 5 attack for the red pitch version, only a 2 defense, which is kind of low, but you really don't want to be defending with this card. You want to be attacking with this card. It says, reveal the top card of your deck. Ravenous Rabble gets -X attack, where X is the pitch value of the card revealed this way. The pitch value is located in the top left corner of the card, so this pitch value is 1 here. It also has, and this is very important, go again. So basically you want to play this card in a deck that has very few yellow or blue pitch cards. You want to play this in a very lean red liner deck where you play a ton of red pitch cards like Ranger or maybe Ninja, or maybe even like a super aggressive Mechanologist deck. You just want to play this in a deck that has a very low curve in terms of pitch, and it's really good in those kind of decks. 4 damage, 0 cost to go again is incredibly good. The yellow pitch version does 4 damage, which would be reduced to 3 and then 2 and then 1, and then the blue pitch version does 3 damage, which is pretty terrible because you don't want to flip another blue pitch card and have this do 0 damage. That is quite bad. So I would say the red pitch Ravenous Rabble, maybe even the yellow pitch Ravenous Rabble, must-haves. Definitely get a full playset of each of those, 3 of each. Next up is a card that doesn't see a ton of play, but I think it will see a ton of play because it's so good and so versatile. This is going to be a staple going forward, especially if combo ever becomes a thing in Flesh and Blood, because combo is not really a thing right now. There's some kind of combo-y decks out there, like the one-turn kill Runeblade deck, but there's not a ton of stuff out there right now. But I do think this card is fantastic for setting up synergies and setting up combos. So what this card does, it's a 0-cost card. It's a generic action, 3 defense, which is pretty good. It actually defends decently well, and it's very simple. It just says opt for, which means look at the top 4 cards of your deck. You can put them back on the top or the bottom of your deck in any order. Go again. This card's actually already pretty good in certain decks like Ranger and maybe even Runeblade and some other like controlling style decks. But I really think this deck or this card will shine in combo decks once combos become a thing, because this card lets you set up for you know, making hands that have certain cards in them, and that's very difficult in Flesh and Blood because there are not a lot of cards that let you draw other cards, and there's not a lot of ways to get over your maximum hand size of 4, and Whisper the Oracle doesn't really do that, but what it does is it lets you set up future turns, so you can kind of plan that out. So maybe you can arsenal a card in your hand and then set up a card with Whisper the Oracle to combo them together in a future turn. It's also just really good at top of the deck mechanics, so for Mechanologist, for example, or for Ranger, for example. So yeah, I think this card is fantastic. The yellow pitch version does the same thing, but it's opt 3, and the blue pitch version does the same thing, but it's opt 2. I think all of these are fantastic. They're also really good in Wizard. I didn't mention that. Also really good in Wizard, especially the blue pitch version is quite good in Wizard. So I would say get your hands on a red, yellow, and blue pitch version, full playset of Whisper of the Oracle. Once again, it's not really played a lot right now, but I think it will be in the future. And it's still played a little bit, you know, it's still a good card, and it's just a common, so yeah. Next up is one of my personal favorite cards of all time, is Energy Potion. This card is sweet. This card is a generic action item. It is only a blue pitch card, does not have a defense value, which is very important. It's kind of risky there. It costs 0, and it says instant, destroy Energy Potion, gain 2 resources. So this card's a really good way to bank resources for future turns. Just keep in mind that it costs an action to play Energy Potion from your hand onto the field, and then you can use it as an instant to generate resources. So this is a good way to end your turn, you know, maybe playing an attack action and with go again and then dropping an Energy Potion, or simply just dropping an Energy Potion, say you're playing Wizard, and then taking some instant actions on your opponent's turn. Also, it pitches for blue, which is excellent, and has a cost of 0, so you can play this in your ninja decks to, you know, pitch for blue and have that 0 cost in your pitch zone for Katsu. Energy Potion is fantastic. It's seen play in like every kind of deck possible. This is a must-have staple card. Get your hands on 3 of these. You're going to be playing with them for a very long time in Flesh and Blood. Next up is very similar to the previous card, but not quite as ubiquitous. This one is Time Snap Potion. I think I like this one more than Energy Potion because Time Snap Potion breaks the game in ways that no other card does. It is a 0 cost generic action item with a pitch value of 3, very similar to the Energy Potion. All the potions kind of have the same kind of deal. Does not have a defense, just like the Energy Potion. It says action, so this does take an action, it's not an instant. Destroy Time Snap Potion, gain 2 action points. So this is a really good way of gaining an additional action point on your turn, so you can get more actions on a turn where you otherwise would not be able to get more actions. So this is one of the ways that you could actually break the game. Currently there's no way to do anything like truly broken with this, but man, I can imagine this once again going into like some sort of combo deck in the future. You know, Time Snap Potion, setting it up with your Whisper the Oracle, you know, your Energy Potions to get your extra resources to do some shenanigans. I like this card a lot. It still does see some play every now and then, and it's just really good in general, especially like in decks like Wizard, for example, or maybe even Guardian, or maybe even Runeblade. Just a fantastic card. So yeah, definitely get your hands on a full playset of Time Snap Potion. Next up is one that you see in almost every single deck build in the top competitive decks. It is Sigil of Solace. Very simple card, and at first when I saw this I was like, why would you want to play this? And then I kind of learned more about the game and I was like, oh yeah, it's actually really good. So Sigil of Solace is a 0 cost card, does not have a defense, which is very important, but that doesn't really matter all that much because it's an instant, which means it does not take an action point to play, and you can play it also on your opponent's turn anytime that you could play an instant. And it says gain 3 life. It's just so good. It's just it's very versatile because there's arcane damage in Flesh and Blood, and then there's like regular damage, and you can only defend against certain kinds of damage depending on if you have Arcane Barrier or if you have just a defensive card or you want to defend or whatever. This kind of gets around both of that because it just gains you 3 life, but it also helps you go bigger than that, being able to go above your maximum life total, and it's an instant, which means you can play it on your opponent's turn. In fact, I would say the red pitch and the yellow pitch version of this card are the 2 most important ones. So the red pitch gains you 3 life, the yellow pitch gains you 2 life, and the blue pitch only gains you 1 life. I think the red and the yellow are both kind of must-haves. Get your hands on a playset of red Sigil of Solace and yellow Sigil of Solace. Blue, not that much, but might as well get your hands on them anyway because they're very cheap and inexpensive. You'll probably see a lot of people play with the red pitch specifically, a little bit of the yellow, and I've almost never seen the blue pitch see play. I'm sure there's somewhere it sees play, but yeah, Sigil of Solace, just you can find it in a lot of the top tier decks. A lot of people cite it in against hyper aggressive decks. So yeah, Sigil Solace, fantastic. Next up is Scar for a Scar. This is a really, really good generic attack action. It has a cost of 0, defense of 2, which is kind of a bummer, but that's okay. You really want to be playing this card to attack, and it has an attack of 4. It says, when you play Scar for a Scar, if you have less health than your opponent, it gains Go Again. So this is actually very similar to Ravenous Rabble. In fact, you want to put Scar for a Scar in the same kind of decks that you want to put Ravenous Rabble in, except for Scar for a Scar can go in a wider range of decks, because you can put it in with decks that actually have a higher pitch curve, because all you need to do is have less life than your opponent. So if your opponent's very aggressive and they're doing a lot of damage to you, then Scar for a Scar could be a really good side into your deck if you know, like, oh, they're going to be playing a very aggressive deck. So Scar for Scar is fantastic. It's already seen play in tons of decks. I play it in my Ninja deck. I play it in my Warrior deck. You can play this in basically any deck where you want to be kind of aggressive. Play this in an aggressive Runeblade deck. Play this in any aggressive deck. So Scar for Scar is just a fantastic staple for Flesh and Blood, especially the red version. The yellow version, not quite as good. 0 cost, 3 damage with Go Again with if you have less health than your opponent. And the blue pitch one is even less than that, only 2 damage on the blue pitch. I would say definitely get your hands on a playset of the red pitch specifically, because that 4 damage is so good. 4 damage means that your opponent has to defend with at least 2 cards from their hand to prevent that damage, because most cards have a defense value of 3. So yeah, 4 is where you want to be. 3 can be good too. The 3 damage there for the yellow pitch can be good too, but definitely get a full play set of the red and maybe the yellow. And you can probably skip the blue, but yeah, it's a common card, so if you're going to get it, might as well pick it up as well. The next 2 cards kind of go hand in hand, but I definitely wanted to talk about them individually because they do serve individual purposes. The first one is Pummel. This card is excellent. I play this on a lot of decks, honestly. It is a generic attack reaction with a defense of 2. Once again, you really don't want to be defending with this. You can if you have to, but you don't want to. It costs 2 to play. This does have the full gambit of red, yellow, and blue, and it says choose one, target club or hammer weapon. So basically, currently, Brute and Guardian gains +4 damage, or target attack action card with cost 2 or greater gains +4, and if this hits, the defending hero discards a card. Pummel is so good. I put Pummel in so many different decks. I put this in my Guardian deck, put this in your Brute deck, put this in my Viserai Runeblade deck. It's so sweet, man. Just being able to play a Command and Conquer and then Pummel on your Command and Conquer for 10 damage, and if it hits, they have to discard a card, so it really forces them to commit. Otherwise, they're going to have a terrible next turn. So, or just take a ton of damage, and then also still have to discard a card. Pummel is so good, and because it's a reaction, you can actually do this after they've already committed some cards. You can, say you attack with your Command and Conquer, and they commit only like 1 card to it, and you can be like, boom, Pummel, dude, just Pummel on top of that, discard a card. It's so good. Pummel's such a fantastic card. Also, you can use it to pump up your hammer or club swings with Guardian or Brute, but like I said, really, really good card. The yellow version does the exact same thing, except it's +3 damage. Blue pitch, exact same thing, except it's +2 damage. I play the red and the yellow in many decks. I don't really play the blue pitch all that much, but yeah, you can definitely still play with it. I think I put it in some versions of my Runeblade deck because I really needed the resources, and I could definitely see this being in Guardian as well, because they're also very resource intensive. But yeah, definitely get a full play set of all of these. Red, yellow, and blue. Pummel's fantastic. Next up is Razor Reflex. This is kind of the counterpart to Pummel, and I put this in every other deck that doesn't get Pummel. It gets basically Razor Reflex. So this one is a generic attack reaction, defense of 2. This one only has a cost of 1. The red pitch version says choose one, target sword or weapon attack gains +3. So you got your ninja, you got your warrior, you got your Runeblade even, but I like Pummel and Runeblade more, not for their weapon attack, but for the attack action. That leads me to the next part. Target attack action card with costs 1 or less gains +3, and if this hits, this attack gains Go Again. Oh, this one's so good too. So this one's really good with going wide, whereas Pummel's about going tall. One single really big attack that forces your opponent to discard a card. This one gives your attack Go Again, which is so good. So you can either play this in like a Dorinthia deck, either pumping up your weapon or pumping up your attack actions. You can put this even in Ranger, pumping up your arrow attacks and giving them Go Again, because almost all of them costs 1 or less resources. Razor Reflex is an absolute must-have. You need to get your full playset of red Razor Reflexes, and maybe even yellow Razor Reflexes, which do the same thing, but just, 2 damage instead of 3. And then the blue version, I don't ever play with this, but if you can get it, might as well get it. It just does 1 damage. But being able to give the attack action go again is pretty good. But it only does it if it hits. So the blue version is not quite as good. But keep in mind, once again, it's a reaction, so you can play this after your opponent has already defended with cards in their hand. So they'd have to have a reaction, a defensive reaction to counter that. But yeah, Razor Reflex, definitely get a full playset of every single pitch, especially the red and the yellow. Speaking of defense reactions, we have the beefiest one in the entire game with Unmovable. This one is a 3-cost card, generic defense reaction with a defense of 7. And it says if Unmovable is played from the arsenal, it gets a +1. Yo, that is insane. That's 8 defense reaction, but it costs 3 to play, so it's very resource intensive. This is probably the single best defending card for a generic in the entire game right now. It's just so fantastic. You definitely want to put this in if you're planning on playing against really heavy hitting decks. So if you're playing against a Bravo deck or just any other deck that really wants to go big with a single huge attack. The yellow pitch version has a defense of 6, and the blue pitch version has a defense of 5. Those are both still quite good. I play this in my Guardian deck, for example. I play the blue pitch versions as well as the red pitch versions in my Guardian deck. In fact, I play the red pitch versions in my my Warrior deck too in some builds. So I think Unmovable is fantastic. Definitely get a full playset of these. You're going to put these in a lot of different decks. This is a card that sometimes will live in your main deck, or at least the deck that you like to play with most, but it's really good just in your 80 cards, so you can kind of sight it in if you think your opponent's going to be playing some really heavy hitting attack. So yeah, Unmovable, fantastic. Get yourself a full playset of all of them, honestly, but mostly the red and the blue, but the yellow is pretty good too. And the final card for today, and arguably the most played generic common card, is Sink Below. This card is so good. It's such a good card. So Sink Below is a generic defense reaction. It has a defense of 4 for the red pitch. It costs 0, and it says you may put a card from your hand on the bottom of your deck. If you do, draw a card. This basically lets you mulligan a card for your turn. And I'll kind of explain that in a little bit as we start talking about the card, but having a defense of 4 as a reaction with a cost of 0 is just so good. It's so good. And because of the way that Flesh and Blood works, you draw your cards at the end of your turn. You can play Sink Below on your opponent's turn, obviously, as they're attacking you, to basically mulligan a card from your hand to the bottom of your deck and then draw an additional card, which is so good. So you draw your hand of 4, and you have your Sink Below in there, and they're doing a big attack, and you're like, oh, I gotta defend against this anyway. Defend with my Sink Below as a reaction, and then you get to put one of the crappy cards from your hand on the bottom of your deck and then draw another card, hopefully setting up for a better turn. So this not only is a really good defensive card, but also helps you set up for future turns. Helps you set up for future turns. I kind of slurred that a little bit, but Sink Below is just so good. The yellow pitch version is the exact same thing, but 3 defense. Blue pitch is the exact same thing, but 2 defense. 2 defense is not great. It's not great. Yellow pitch is also not great. They're still good. They still have the same effect, but the red pitch is where you want to be. You definitely need to get multiple play sets of the red pitch Sink Below, because this goes in almost every single deck. I have this in almost every single classic constructed deck that I have currently built, just flat out. At least somewhere in the deck I got some Sink Belows, either as cards that I mainline in the deck, or just if I want to side it in against really aggressive matchups. I usually put this in my main deck though. It's just such a fantastic card. So definitely get your hands on multiple play sets of the red pitch Sink Below, because if you have a lot of decks, you're gonna want to put this in a lot of decks, and then maybe the yellow and maybe the blue, but definitely the red. You definitely want the red. And that'll about do it for today's video. If you like the video, then like, comment, subscribe, share this with your friends who you think would like some Flesh and Blood content. Next week, or maybe the week after, we're going to be doing the super rare and majestic versions of this video. So I think that's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a little bit more, expensive. I think this one in particular, this video, is really good for new players or just players starting out who want to build budget decks, because these cards are all so fantastic and they can go in just a myriad of decks. But the next one, we're definitely going to focus on the supers and the majestics, and we're gonna there's some spicy cards there. As always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time for some more Flesh and Blood content. We'll see you then.